Hello, everybody. I'm the chair of the next panel, and my name's Wendy Pettifer. First of all, I'd like to thank all the fantastic contributions that we've had from Yarlswood, especially, well, everybody, but the video by Mabel was very moving and I think gives us all hope. My panellists were going to be Tawfiq Hussain, who's head of public law at Duncan Lewis, but really, unfortunately, his wife's sick, so I'm going to stand in for him. I've then got Omer Schatz, Amelia Cooper, and Sean Binder, and I'll introduce them individually, and then I'll take questions at the end. So my panel's about unlawful pushbacks in the Mediterranean and the Channel, and we look to see what remedies can be taken and how we can fight back. As we all know, since 2015, we've seen a massive right-wing shift across Europe with the rise of populist right-wing governments, and that's had a terrible effect on migrants and asylum seekers. The unsuccessful coup against Erdogan in Turkey, the fall of Syriza in Greece, and the installation of a very right-wing government there, the election of Johnson in the UK, both give states a license to legislate against human rights. And sadly, we've seen the demonisation of migrants and asylum seekers with the result that many people have drowned in the Mediterranean. They've been unlawfully sent back to Turkey, Libya, recently from the UK to mainland Europe. We're all activists, some of us are lawyers, and we're all committed to taking action to minimise the inhuman consequences of the changing nature of global politics. I've worked in the field of human rights, first as an activist and then as a solicitor for many years. I've worked mainly on housing and migration issues affecting migrants in the UK, in the Law Centre movement, but I've also, since 2016, worked in Calais and Athens, and before that, I worked in Cairo with an organisation called Amira. So my really sincere apologies. I know some of you would have been looking forward to hearing Tawfiq, but I've run through what I'm saying with him, and we were, unsurprisingly, saying more or less the same things. We've seen in the previous panel evidence of the result of the increasingly harsh, inhuman and degrading treatment being administered to recent arrivals in the UK from small boats, mainly across the Channel. And my view is that, you know, we take the fight wherever we can. We take the fight through the High Court, which I have done many times, and we also take the fight, as Karen and Prosy and Mabel and the other speakers said, we have to take the fight on the streets, we have to demonstrate and support those who are denied access to justice. Sheroy Zak from Duncan Lewis already explained in the previous panel that surprisingly, we are finding that we've got the judiciary on our side. As Priti Patel, shame on her, the child of migrants herself, seeks to house migrants offshore, to redefine access to judicial review, and even to control the definition that our highest judges make on what are human rights abuses. On the 21st of October, there was a successful case which said that removing migrants and without access to legal advice, and indeed denying them access to legal advice in the holding centres, was unlawful and must be stopped. The case was brought by Medical Justice, the Public Law Project and Duncan Lewis, and hopefully this decision will prevent more people from being exposed to injustice, hardship, danger, and sometimes even death, as has been spelt out by the previous contributors who were actually currently being held in the short-term holding centres. The Home Office must look at humane ways to fix our broken asylum system, not inhumane ways. The reaction to the Home Office has been, by the Home Office, to the small boat crossings has been completely disproportionate. We saw over 6,000 in 2020, but if you look at Southern Europe, as our subsequent speakers, Omer, Amelia and Sean will all do, in 2019 there were over 105 attempted crossing, over 105,000 attempted crossings in the Mediterranean, with a tragic result that hundreds of people have died there. And that sea is full of the bodies of migrants now. If we turn to the UK, under cover the excuse of COVID, holding centres, short-term holding facilities have been set up in Yarswood, Brookhouse, Folkestone and Wales. And as Sheroy already mentioned, the government's own independent monitoring board, who are made up of government appointees, released their 2019 report 2 days ago, and another report on the short-term holding facilities. And they found, for example, in 2019, in Brookhouse, which is notorious and was the subject of a successful legal proceedings last year in respect of the cruel treatment of detainees there. I actually had a client who I got out of there. There were 102 assaults, 260 threats of violence and 24 fights. The report also details serious abuse of restraint on removal flights, and in the new barracks that have been set up, detainees sleeping on the floor without beds, no access to showers, and has already been said, no access to medical advice or legal advice. 73 children have been held at Heathrow pending removal for over 12 hours. There's been previous case law which has established that it's unlawful to detain children. Some people, we think, have been fast-tracked out of the UK without anyone knowing, but thanks to the work of groups like our previous speaker, Detention Action, but also Kent Refugee Action Network, Medical Justice and Get to It Detainee Welfare Group, many people have been able to access lawyers at the last minute who have been able to defer, sorry, I can't do it now. Sorry, someone's just trying to come in because I'm at home. They've been able to defer removals and issue judicial review proceedings. Another ground upon which people can be stayed in the UK is that if there's any evidence to say they're victim of trafficking. I've worked in France and in Athens as a refugee lawyer and an activist lawyer, and particularly in Calais, I came across on a daily basis, I was there for several months, actions of cruelty amounting to inhuman and degrading treatment against children and young adults. I've seen the vicious CRS police kick kids out of tents, steal their trainers, steal their sleeping bags, and my Syrian interpreter was really badly beaten up by them and was hospitalised for 3 months. So all this has been much worse by COVID, and COVID's been a sort of blanket against which further abuses can be perpetrated. So I'll really briefly explain the legal grounds upon which we can try and stop these unlawful removals. There's a European regulation called the Dublin III regulation, which currently enables children and vulnerable young people to be reunited with close family members in the UK. If people who are being detained are able to disclose information that they have close family members who are willing to accept them, then they should absolutely not be removed until that situation has been explored. Arguments can also be raised in accordance with Article 3 of the Human Rights Act if we can show that people, as I've just explained, might be subject to inhuman and degrading treatment if they're returned to France. The courts aren't terribly keen to accept these arguments, but recently they have accepted one or two. And also, sometimes the people who end up in Calais have already got asylum status in Italy or Greece. and that would be their ultimate destination. And there's been quite a few more successful Article 3 cases against Italy and Greece. Another area that we can try and get people stayed here is if they disclose evidence that they're victims of trafficking. People are often very scared and reluctant to do this, understandably. But if there is evidence, then they come under the national referral mechanism, and again cannot be removed until that's properly investigated. A lot of people don't. The difference between smuggling and trafficking is it's the person who was moving the migrant to the UK had a criminal intent in doing so. So it's usually people who are being moved to the UK to work in the sex or the drugs trade. And there are some other more unusual procedural grounds which removal can be stopped. The government's shifting the ground all the time. They've already responded to the outcome of the decision in the High Court, but I haven't had a chance to read it. I understand that they're ignoring the principal point, which was that people were being denied access to legal advice. So they've shifted. They're now removing people to Toulouse and then perhaps onward to other European destinations. So they can avoid the defence, if you like, the grounds for staying in the UK that removal to Calais would engage Article 3. But the decision in the court must be seen as a real victory, because what the Home Office was also doing was when they were in the short-term detention for 14 days, they were giving them a 72-hour notice saying, you can be removed, even if we let you out to hotels around the country, we can come and get you, we can remove you without any notice. So that has been declared to be unlawful, and hopefully will render the Home Office more accountable. I'll very briefly touch on what's going to happen after Brexit, because Brexit, you know, we're arriving at a no-deal Brexit by the end of December, and then we'll no longer, the UK probably will be in a no-deal Brexit, not in the EU. Now, really, ironically, the transfer agreements between France and the UK are part of our participation in the EU, and they will fail. They will fall on the 31st of December. And unless the UK sets up an independent bilateral agreement with France, which is looking increasingly unlikely, the UK won't be able to send people back to France if they come from France, which is kind of great, but it's also why the Home Office is desperate to remove these people and to stop them coming before the end of the year, because they are aware of this problem. Tragically, Dublin III, which has been the principal mechanism that we've relied on since its inception in 2013, to allow mainly children to be joined with family members, looks like will not be effective after the end of the year. Alf Dubs, whom I'm sure many of you know, has fought like a Trojan to put an amendment to the current immigration bill, which would expand and allow, not expand, expand the government's definition of close family members so that some kids can still get in. That's been defeated in the Commons. Dubs won in the Lords last week, so now it's going back to Commons. So watch this space, but you know, we have got an incredibly right-wing government in there at the moment with a large majority. We're still bound by the European Convention on Human Rights and other international treaties and conventions which protect human rights, but no doubt Johnson and his minions are doing everything possible they can to try and find ways out of those obligations. So to summarise, I would say, you know, I fought for probably 30 years now in this area, and we must never lose sight of our common humanity. And that has been really well demonstrated in the previous panel. Things are very dark now, but whatever we're doing, our work continues to be a beacon, a light of hope for, as the last speaker, Mohammed, just said, for people who otherwise are completely desperate and have no hope. And for me, I think that what's happening to migrants and asylum seekers is the epitomisation of the shift to the right wing, not only of this government, but sadly of governments all over the world. As activist lawyers, we are now just touching on the experience that many of our noble comrades have been experiencing across Europe and the world for years, from Turkey to the Philippines, from Nigeria to India. You know, many people have been killed defending human rights. We must carry on this fight until the liberal state will come down on us, but we must carry on defending those who have no other defense. We must be ready to fight back, and we must support individuals and empower individuals carrying on their own struggles, as we've seen in a very convincing and moving way, particularly, I think, by that great video by Mabel. So that's really all I've got to say. And I think my next panelist, Omer, is here and can take up the, I don't know, whatever it is, can carry on with the next speech. Okay, Omer? Oh yes, I've just got to introduce you, haven't I? Omer is an international lawyer and an academic for Sciences Po University. He and a colleague filed a groundbreaking action with the International Criminal Court against EU and member state officials concerning migration policies in the central Mediterranean and Libya. And as I've already said, we think we've got it bad here. What's going on in Greece and Italy is like 1,000,000 times worse in terms of volume, if not in terms of inhumanity. So he's going to speak about European and British crimes against humanity. He advises Médecins Sans Frontières, and he's a prominent figure in the fight against European-wide immigration policy. Over to you, Omer, and I'm really looking forward to your speech.
Hello, everybody. You hear me well?
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. So with the limited time I have, I will try to, I presume, I don't know who the audience is and what is the prior knowledge, but I'll try to give some overview on the Central Mediterranean route from Libya to Italy, or from North Africa to Europe more broadly. So what we are witnessing, in fact, with all the respect to all the legal proceedings that Wendy just mentioned, at the domestic, national, regional, and international level, is not a crisis, migration crisis, or I don't know. Even it's not about even human rights. It's a crisis. It's a legal crisis. It's a crisis of international law. We are having, just to start maybe with the figures, and then we will speak maybe later on the policies. So in the Mediterranean, since 2014 to date, we have 20,000 casualties, civilians. So just to give you to relativize a bit, in the Bosnian genocide, Herzegovina, there were about 7,000 casualties. The maximal estimation of the Rohingya genocide is between 10 to 20,000. So we are talking on a genocidal scale. There is a war in the Mediterranean, and the war is not against another state. It's not against a terrorist organization. It's not against combatants. It's against civilians, and it's against it's targeting a specific civilian group. So I think we have to take some distance and estrangement from we are so immersed in topics like migrations and human rights, and to look at it just as it is. If I would have told you that there is a terrorist organization such as a non-state armed group like Al-Qaeda that is intercepting specific population in distress at sea and killing them by drowning, and the survivors are forcibly transferred to a concentration camps inland elsewhere, where they are subjected to crimes against humanity. This is not me, Omer Schatz, or Wendy saying. This is the ICC prosecutor in her statements to the UN Security Council that in the camps in Libya there are committed crimes within the meaning of the Rome Statute, falling under her jurisdiction, crimes against humanity of murder, enslavement, torture, abuse, rape, imprisonment, of course, and other inhuman acts, persecution. And this terrorist organization is responsible for that. Then the EU and the ICC, everyone would have, of course, launched a campaign to arrest, investigate, prosecute those responsible. But this is not the case, and this terrorist organization is not Al-Qaeda. This organization, this supranational non-state armed group, is the EU itself. And they are directly responsible for intentional killing by drowning of 20,000 civilians, children, women, and men. And the survivors of this first policy are forcibly transferred to Libya, where they are subjected to numerous crimes against humanity. We are talking here about 50,000 people that were intercepted, refoulés, expulsed, and detained, indefinitely and arbitrarily detained in Libyan camps. 50,000 individuals since 2016 only. And counting. As we speak, there are boats in distress at sea. Maybe Sean can elaborate more, maybe on the Eastern Mediterranean route, but as we speak, there are shipwrecks. As we speak, there are refoulements, there is forcible transfer, and this is committed not by a non-state armed group with limited means, but with the complex apparatus of power of the EU and the member states. We are talking about billions of taxpayers' money. And when I'm saying member state, this includes the UK. This is why I added to my usual title, European and British crimes against humanity, because in fact, the UK is highly involved, even though that the UK and the EU have this like opt-in, opt-out mechanism with respect to migration. And the UK is the only member state that have due diligence policies in place to prevent involvement in these kinds of atrocity crimes. And nonetheless, the DFID, the Department for International Development, I believe this is the acronym, and we have the OSJA, no? The Overseas Security and Justice Assistance, the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, all these bodies. And the UK still funds the training of the Libyan Coast Guard, implementing projects in Libya, in the camps, having their Navy ships involved in maritime operations like Sophia, and so forth. So now to give you more about the story of the Central Mediterranean. So it started with the Lampedusa shipwrecks of 2013, following which Enrico Letta, the Italian Prime Minister, launched an operation known as Mare Nostrum that was tasked with the rescue. The mandate was to rescue all migrants in distress at sea. It was a relatively successful operation, but it resulted in disembarkation in Europe. And so the European Union and political fractions in Italy opposed it. You're familiar with the terms pull factor and death factor and so on. And therefore, with the support of the UK government, especially Theresa May as Minister of Interior and later on Prime Minister and so on, this operation was intentionally replaced with a Frontex joint operation that was called Triton, which intentionally, internal documents that we intercepted for our case before the International Criminal Court, intentional and evidence that it was intentional to deter others from taking the journey by creating, by letting them drown, by killing by drowning, by not conducting rescue. And when I'm saying this is a targeting of specific population, you have to acknowledge the discriminatory nature of this policy. So the laws of the sea are the same laws for everyone. Huh? They are blind to who is the identity of those rescues of the people in distress at sea. Nonetheless, if a white person on a yacht is in distress at sea at the critical search and rescue zone where all the boats in distress in the Central Mediterranean are likely to be in danger, you will see 7 Frontex and other European vessels several vessels coming to the rescue with drones, maritime drones. There are many means to this to conduct this kind of rescue. But if the same boat is composed of non-white people on board, they will be simply left to die, or drones of Frontex from Warsaw or MRCC from Rome. MRCC, it's the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, or from La Valletta in Malta, will communicate the location of the boat in distress privately. So rescue NGOs will not have access to the location of the boat in distress, even if they are in proximity and they can conduct, they have the know-how and the means to conduct the rescue. And they communicated to a consortium of militias that today is called the Libyan Coast Guard, which will come out and intercept and detain them on board and then take them to the camps, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a policy. This is not typically scholars and lawyers frame the part of the EU in these policies as aiding and abetting or assisting Libya in their border control policy, but it's the other way around. The Libyan have no interest, they have no political will, and they had no technical competency to chase people that wants to leave Libya. The only reason why they are doing that is because they are financed and they contracted with, it's a bunch of mercenaries and militias that are, by the way, listed in the human traffickers list of the UN Security Council and the arm embargo and several bodies. So this is the people that the EU is dealing with in order to externalize and to outsource these policies. But to go back to the policy, so the first policy is what we have termed as killing by omission, which aim to create a gap, a critical gap in the central Mediterranean where people will drown. This was envisioned before Triton was launched, during Triton and after Triton. So we have documents that show the mens rea, what we call in criminal law, the state of mind of the perpetrators, that they foreseen the risk and they accepted the risk and they didn't modify their policies once this risk materialized. So indeed, in April 2015, in 1 week, more than 1,200 civilians, what is known as the Black Week of April, in 2 shipwrecks, 1,200 civilians, children and men and women that are fleeing an armed conflict war were drowned and died. This first policy of the EU failed. Why it was failed? Because the rescue NGOs came into play, and civil society tried to bridge that gap by doing what the EU was legally, the EU and member states were legally obliged to do, which is under international maritime law, under international human rights law, under international refugee law, any framework that you can pick oblige them to conduct safe rescue and safe disembarkation that will result in disembarkation in European ports effectively. Once the rescue NGOs came into play, this first policy of deterrence-based policy of killing by drowning failed, and because rescue NGOs comply with international law and they disembarked the rescuees, the survivors from the Libyan camps and the Libyan armed conflict in Europe. So the EU had to move to a new policy. This time it was the other way around. It was, instead of withdrawing their means, withdrawing the vessels, withdrawing the operational zone, withdrawing the maritime operations from the Mediterranean, and the idea was to the contrary. They had to restore the Berlusconi-Gaddafi agreements that were in place before the shoot of Gaddafi, and to outsource their migration policies to the Libyan side. So actually this second policy that we call atrocity crimes against humanity by proxy had 2 legs, had 2 parts. One, they had to oust the NGOs to leave room to bring in the mercenaries, to bring in the militias that could be, so the campaign against the NGOs was highly successful to date. Our case, I think, stopped in June 2019, but even today, At the peak of the rescue NGOs activity in the Mediterranean, we had about 12 boats operational. Today, maybe we have 1. So there is a drop of like 90% in the presence of rescue NGOs in the critical search and rescue zone. And this campaign was principally a criminalization campaign, but also the legitimization and harassment and instigation and other administrative means of what we called in our brief as persecution by prosecution. So abuse of power and using the means of the state to dismantle the operation of rescue NGOs in a variety of means, and not only criminalization. Today, for example, the tactic, especially in Italy, is more on the administrative, technical. You have too many life vests, you don't have too many life vests, it's not clean enough, they don't respect German certificates issued in Germany that license the boat. Italian don't recognize another European member state registration. So this is the variety of effective tactics. This part of the policy was highly successful. Rescue NGOs are not really today present, as opposed to at some point they had 30 or 40% of the rescue of the SOLAS events, of the search and rescue events were operated and effectuated by. And this is also in collaboration with the maritime rescue centers in Rome, in La Valletta. So intentionally, the boats of NGOs are instructed to step aside, and Libyan Coast Guard vessels are assumed command over the interception, okay? So the second part of the second policy was to bring in the Libyan Coast Guard. The Libyan Coast Guard did not exist before the EU had to reinvent and reconstruct it. In the 2011 NATO intervention, it was the enemy. NATO destroyed the Libyan Coast Guard completely. And so they reconstructed the boat. They provided boats. Italy and also France attempted to do so, Malta and others. And they provided the boats, they provided training, they provide the means, the funding. And of course, as I often say, this is the illegitimate part of the second policy, but there is also the legitimate part of this policy, which is the funding of, for example, intergovernmental organizations like the UNHCR and IOM to operate, to wait for the survivors in the disembarkation points in Libya and to facilitate their voluntarily return to their countries of origin, or the UNHCR that facilitates the abuse in the reception centers and so on. So to conclude, we are dealing with for the first time since World War II and the Holocaust, Western liberal democracies, this is not only since World War II, in first time in history, in human history, liberal democracies, not authoritarian regimes, are implicated in atrocity crimes outside an armed conflict context. For the first time in human history, to the best of my knowledge, the targeted population is not defined by who they are, Jews, Bosnians, Tutsi, Rohingya, Uyghur, what have you, based of ethnicity, race, religion, but on where they are. To put it more precisely, the targeted population is defined as a population, as a group, singularized as a population, just for the purpose of its dehumanization, criminalization, rejection. I'm talking on the entire scope of treatment of migrants now, also in not only in their journey, but also in the host countries, right? So they are first dehumanized, discriminated, rejected, criminalized, expulsed, and with respect to the policies I'm concerned with, killed and abused, and in my view, one day also exterminated. So we are already in terms, in the figures, we are talking on genocidal figures, right? As I said in the beginning, but I really believe that with the climate change and in years to come, this is the ultimate scapegoat to externalize. I don't know if this is the consequences of the 2008 economical crisis. Think how it will be. Even today in Italy, you see in Italy it's very immediate and vulgar, the connection. So you see the campaign against migrants in the context of the COVID, for example. They send them to boats, to quarantine boats, and they are accused of bringing the COVID and so on by the popular right. So maybe time is up, Wendy, and maybe there are questions I am happy to ask. Maybe I didn't have time to talk about the case itself or the ICC, but
yeah, okay, that's absolutely brilliant, and I'm sorry I had to cut you short, Omer, because you know it's a really interesting topic that we know little about. I mean, as I said, I spent time in Greece and Italy, and I've really seen how much worse it is there. I've just got a little story, actually. I was in Naples last year on a conference on my own, and I'm over 60. I was wandering around in a very, very bad area where there were lots of migrants kind of sleeping in the street and, you know, people taking drugs, etc. And my sandal broke. I was really scared. I went up to this guy and said, in my terrible Italian, can you help me? He took me to a shoe shop. He helped me get some sandals. So, I mean, that's just a little story that I remember that, you know, brings us back to both the desperate situation that people are in and the compassion and humanity that people can retain in those situations.